Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shanti.
As we prepare ourselves to spend this time in meditation, if you have not already done so, I invite you to close your outer eyes and just bring yourself and your awareness into this sweet sanctuary, into this present moment, right here, right now. There is nothing to do, nowhere else to be. Just for a little bit, put everything, all thoughts of everything outside of this sanctuary and in the world, just put it on neutral for just a few moments. so that we can be with, in our awareness, the one power and the one present that is activating and animating the universe, all life in the universe, including my own, including yours. This one power, one presence is everywhere present, as we know, and has been for all time. The same one power, the same one presence is the same one that activated and animated Jesus' life during his time. Wherever he traveled, whoever he spoke to, whoever he taught, whoever he healed, this one power and one presence was present in those moments as well. Present for those experiences, providing the creative power that heals all. Teaching about the creative power that leads us to prosperity, leads us to wellness and wholeness. And the same one power that was in Jesus is the same one power right here, right now with me and you. As we prepare our time in the silence, bring that awareness of the one power and one presence, and just for a few moments in the silence, be with that. Be fully present to it. You can ask anything, or you can just simply be still and listen to see if there's any guidance. But you may feel free to ask for guidance, knowing that the one power and the one presence is always available to us, always powerful in our lives. When we step aside, when we surrender, and when we allow this power and presence to actively work in our life and maintain our awareness of it, we are truly working and walking in alignment with truth. And this is the truth that we seek to know right now, right here in this sweet sanctuary, as we go into the silence. Into the silence. Living, loving Spirit, the source of all creation, the source of all creative power, all divine knowledge and intelligence. We are so grateful to bring our awareness and our consciousness to your presence, to your power, to your divine intelligence, knowing that it is at work in our lives, even in those moments when we are unaware of it. Even in the moments when we attempt to push it away from us and try to do things ourselves, we are so grateful that the one power and one presence continues to stay present with us, whether we're aware or whether we're trying to push it away. Today, in this space, we open ourselves to hear the word of truth about this one power and one presence. And we ask ourselves, what is ours to do? How are we to put this into play into our lives? How are we to take this beyond just a principle of truth and a concept and make the one power and one presence active in our lives, everywhere present in every aspect of our lives? So we open ourselves up in prayer. We open our minds and our hearts to hear the word of truth. And we know that it will be delivered. And we pray in the name and the nature of Jesus the Christ. And so it is. And so we let it be. Amen.
Some things I've done have made my conscience burn, my very spine shudder and squirm. I only hope that I've learned from my sin. I heard a voice when I was 13 and got baptized, washed up clean. But the world has a way, if you know what I mean, of scuffing you up again and again. Can't explain a blessed thing, not a falling star or feathered wing, or how a man in chains has the strength to save. Just one thing is clear to me, there's always more than what appears to be. And when the light's just right, I swear I see. Poetry. Poetry. Somebody made everything, from the soul inside out to Saturn's rings, how a baby smiles and how Ray Charles sings. The clouds make rain and the ocean makes sand, the earth breathes fire and lava makes land. Now that took a mighty hand and a wild imagination. Yep. Can't explain a blessed thing, not a falling star or a feathered wing, or how a man in chains has the strength to save. Just one thing is clear to me, there's always more than what appears to be. And when the light's just right, I swear I see. Poetry. A dream to come back tenfold. The friends I have, the woman I hold. I look down and I'm on a street of gold after all the mud along the way. Sometimes that big old mystery, well, it just leans right in on me and it whispers, I'm home and I'm free. And I'll take that any day. Any day. Can't explain a blessed thing, not a falling star, feathered wing, or how a man in chains has the strength to save. Just one thing is clear to me, there's always more than what appears to be. And when the light's just right, I swear I see. Poetry. Poetry. In the old man's eyes, in the baby's smile, out in the street. Thank you.
Very nice. Ron's channeling his inner Bob Dylan this morning. It sounds great. Good morning, everyone. So today, the word of the day is divine order, as we heard just moments ago. And it's truly one of those things. When Reverend Sandra texted me Thursday afternoon and said she was ill and asked if I was available to speak this weekend, I was like, yes, I am. And it was the only Sunday this month that I was available to do it. So I'm really happy to be here. And I did not know the word of the day was going to be divine order, but let's go ahead and affirm that, because we'll be talking about that as well here in the talk this morning. Reverend Sandra asked me to speak on the one power and the one presence this morning, which is effectively unity principle number one. I find that I can't talk about unity principle number one without at some point in the discussion talking about unity principle number 2 and number 3 and number 4 and especially number 5, which is the action, taking action on this. It's one thing for us to discuss these principles and even the 12 powers and other unity teachings and so forth and discuss them as intellectual concepts. But as you know, unity is a movement of practical Christianity. We want to put this into motion. We want to, as Eric Butterworth says, we're interested in the religion of Jesus, not the religion about Jesus. We want to know how he did, what his teachings mean to us practically speaking in our lives. And so we're starting with unity principle number 1. Now, I don't know, maybe some of y'all are aware of this, maybe you're not, but pretty much everywhere you go, when you see any individual unity churches and they have their articulations of the 5 principles, there's usually some subtle differences. There's no one standard way to state the principles. And each of the unity churches kind of modifies it a little bit. Your presentation of unity principle number 1 is really close to the one that we use at Unity Church of the Hills. But others have slightly different variations. If you start at the most basic level of unity principle number 1, the simplest way to state it is that God is absolute good, everywhere present. That's one of the most simplest direct statements. And I think that's, if I recall correctly, that's how Ellen Davenport articulates it in her book on the 5 principles, that real simple statement. I notice that y'all add the God, the good, omnipresent part, and we're going to talk about omnipresent. We're going to talk about, omnipotent, omnipotence, omniscient, omniscience, because there are subtle differences here in these terms. And one of the things about that I'm working on in my own personal journey and everything, especially as it relates to unity principle number 1, is if there is only one power and one presence active in the universe in my life, then 2 things I have to give up. I have to give up my false belief in separation, and I have to give up the idea that there's an opposing power out there competing with God for the fate of the universe, that there is no evil incarnate. And that's one of the things that comes up a lot of times in discussion when you say there's only one power and one presence active in the universe. There is no opposing power. Well, how do you explain evil then? Well, yeah, that's a good one. We got to figure out a way to language ourselves to address that question for people who don't quickly come to this. Ellen Davenport would say that what we call evil, what we recognize as evil in the world, is not an evil agent, an evil power, an evil domain of power that's operating against God. It's human beings misusing spiritual principle. It's human beings doing this. I said in the first service this idea, if God is the creator of everything, then we can look at God as being the one that's providing the bandwidth. We're the ones putting the content in the bandwidth. It's the same thing as like on Facebook, for example. People say, I hate Facebook. Well, you can't hate Facebook. Facebook is just a medium. It's just a platform for communication. We're the ones putting the content in Facebook. So if you have a resistance to that, it would be about what the human beings are putting into the pipeline. The actual medium itself, the platform itself, is neutral. It doesn't, if we weren't putting anything in it, it wouldn't do anything. It would just sit there and be available. And it's the same way with God. God's always available, but unless we're availing ourselves of God's power and God's presence, then that's a different kind of experience we're going to have. For me personally, the way I gauge my experience, gauge how I'm doing, if I'm implementing, whether I'm implementing unity principle number 1, or I'm working with one of the 12 powers, or writing my book, talking about peace, peace is a big deal for me. And that's how I gauge whether I'm working in alignment with truth or not. That if I'm experiencing peace more of the time, I'm usually find that I'm in alignment with truth. Whenever I'm not experiencing peace, when I'm experiencing fear, doubt, anxiety, any of those things, it's when I'm denying that there's one power and one presence active in my life, and I'm trying to do it myself. And when I try to do it myself, I rarely ask for help. It's easier for me to do it than to ask for help and to explain to people how to help me. That's been my MO over the course of my life, do it myself. Even when I was a manager in businesses and stuff like that, oftentimes I had a challenge working on delegating to people, because oftentimes it was just easier for me to go ahead and do it and fix it than try to explain to somebody to do it. But that becomes inefficient over time, doesn't it? Then you start being a fixer right? And then you're basically enabling other people to not be present, not take their own responsibility. So it's better that we work on teaching and making everybody, like Jesus would say, make everybody fishers of men, right? You give a man a fish, you feed him tonight. Teach him to fish, you feed him for life, right? Same kind of idea. So how does the one power and one presence work for us? So there's one power, one presence active in the universe and in our lives, God the good, omnipotent. Okay? I want to amend that a little bit this morning for our discussion. We use these terms omnipotent. Okay? Omnipotent. And when I use that term, I'm applying that to an entity. There's still a little bit of separation in our language when we use it that way, because now we're saying God is this entity over here and God is omnipotent, which means all-powerful. Okay? But that's a characteristic that we're projecting onto God. The more appropriate thing to say is God is omnipotence. God is all power itself. Not all powerful, all power. And the same thing does with the presence, right? God is not omnipresent. God is omnipresence. He is the presence and the energy everywhere present. And I would add a third one to this, and some people do when they articulate the first principle. Omniscience, which is all knowledge. God is not omniscient, all-knowing. God is omniscience, all knowledge itself. That is the source. You know, we get to avail ourselves of that. But when we use terms like omniscient, omnipotent, or omnipresent, you got to see that there's a subtlety there that we're still projecting that onto an entity. And in unity, we've attempted to go beyond the personification of God, being embodied in a body that looks like us that we can relate to being God as principle. And when God becomes principle, then it rattles some people's cages, because now I don't have a personal God to relate to. It's ephemeral at that point in time. And that's challenging to a lot of people's consciousness. But also what comes up for them is not just the idea of not having a person that you can relate to or communicate with, is that if God is these principles, then it really calls us to our own personal responsibility in all this. God's not necessarily watching over us and writing down in a book somewhere everything that we do. We are. We're keeping track of our successes and our failures. Oftentimes we give more credence to the failures than we do our successes. It says somewhere that we think the activity of our thoughts and our consciousness, that we think somewhere along the lines of 60,000 thoughts a day. 60,000 thoughts a day during the course of your day. And 80% of those thoughts are negative. 80% of those thoughts are thoughts of fear, anxiety, self-doubt, fear in the world, judgments, criticisms, all those kinds of things. They're negative thoughts. 80% of those thoughts are redundant. We're thinking the same thoughts over and over and over and over. So if you do the math, it comes down to somewhere around 40,000, give or take, negative thoughts a day versus less than 20,000 positive thoughts a day. Now, once again, that's just an average kind of thing about how we're going about it. But it shows up in our media, doesn't it? Most every story in the context of our media is negative. Every once in a while, we'll get a nice little human interest story. Here's a nice little human interest story, something happened good today in the community. What if we had a newscast that dealt with the good? I said in the first service, I said, we don't see this kind of story where, Ron today had an epiphany and a revelation and a connection with the one power and the one presence in the universe active in his life. And as a result, he was inspired to write this great song. And now we have this brand new song here. So tune in at 5 on the news. We're going to have Ron on the news today to talk about his awareness and his revelation, his epiphany today. We don't do that. In the media, the term is, if it bleeds, it leads. If there's death, if there's destruction, if there's something negative, that's the story they open with. Because we're all like rubbernecking, aren't we? It's hard to look away from the car wreck, isn't it? It's always amazing when you're in the lane where the car wreck is not. When the car wreck is on the other side of the road, the traffic on this side of the road gets blocked up too, until you get up to the point of the wreck, and then all of a sudden it's flowing freely again. There was nothing impeding the traffic on this side of the road except that curiosity to see what's the deal. What's the deal? We should just keep going. Just keep moving because we're just making circumstances worse behind us, right? So there's one power and one presence. If there is a one power and one presence, and we say that there is, then the one power and one presence is dealing with that situation, right? It doesn't need me to stop and rubberneck and add my observations to it. It's going to be handled. I can say a prayer as I'm passing this thing that everyone, gets handled and gets where they're going safely. That's the thing that I can contribute to in that moment, not backing up traffic further. That makes the problem worse. So if there's one power and one presence active in the universe and in my life, and it's omnipotent, or I say omnipotence, then it's all power itself. And what does unity principle number 2 say? Unity principle number 2 says we are created in the image and likeness of God. And because God is good, absolute good, then we are inherently good as well. That's our birthright. That's our natural identity, right? So that means that if I'm creating the image and likeness of God, then I have the same creative potential. And I stress that word potential because we're still in the process of growing our power, aren't we? Show you this here right now. We can probably use anything in here. We could use these guitars, but let me use this phone here. This is an iPhone 5, right? This came out the iPhones came out about 10 years ago, right? Wireless technology itself was discovered, as it were, by Tesla back in the 19th century sometime, but it took us another 100 years plus to pull everything together to actually have a network of wireless technology. And now we've got all these different kinds of phones coming out. Now they got an iPhone 10 coming out that's like $1,000 or something like that, But this phone right here is more powerful than the computers that sent the men to the moon. This phone right here, your phone in your pocket, more powerful than the computers that sent the men to the moon. The point that I want to make is that the potential for this, the power that this is, the principles by which this operates, they've always been present. Back when, metaphorically speaking, God says, let there be light. Before that, there was just all the cosmic stuff, right? Well, that cosmic stuff from which everything is created included the principles that we now hold in our hands like this. It's always been present. It was present with Jesus. It was present with Gandhi. It's present with me and you. And it's present with everyone else outside of these walls, including the people that challenge us, including the people we don't agree with, including the people we judge as less than, and maybe even in some cases, the people that we might judge as evil. Like, for example, when a terrorist event happens, like say in Las Vegas a month or so ago, or New York this past week. It's a challenge to our spirituality. How are we to deal with that? That is a big question, isn't it? If there's only one power and one presence in the universe and in my life, and there's no opposing power operating against us, then what do we do when things happen that we call evil? Once again, as Ellen Davenport says, human beings misapplying spiritual principle. They have the same one power and one presence. Why are they acting out this way versus a way that brings about harmony and unity and peace? Course in Miracles says what? There's two kinds of actions in the world. Acts of love and requests for love. Acts of love, requests for love, all day long. And if you put on that pair of glasses, so to speak, and you start evaluating all these incidents like that, you go, okay, a guy shoots a bunch of people at a concert. Is that an act of love? No, it's not, is it? There's pretty much no way I can justify that as an act of love in my consciousness. So it must be a request for love. I don't have to really know what the guy's issue is, right? My response, what I'm contributing to the consciousness in that moment when I'm sitting there watching this go down on TV, and I'm horrified like everybody else, right? It's a human response. It's like, oh my goodness. How does something like this happen, right? We don't know what to do with it. But what we really should do with it is simply pray that good comes from this. In Romans, it says something to the effect, I think I'm paraphrasing maybe a little bit, but all things work towards good for those who love God. So even a crisis like that, the one power and one presence, can enfold even a crisis like that and bring good ultimately out of it. That's part of the divine order thing. That when something seems to disrupt our perception that the divine order has been disrupted, that in unity we would say, no, there's one power and one presence. There's a divine order at work. I may not see it right now, but I know it's there, and I become willing to affirm that into the good, that even this circumstance can be turned to good. That's the practical part. That's when we put the rubber to the road, so to speak. The spiritual rubber meets the road at that point in time. Unity principle number 5 says these truths are meaningless. They are powerless unless we live the truth, unless we put them into play. So, me and my own consciousness, I'm always testing that assumption. And one of the ways I kind of stay between the lines, so to speak, is by using peace as my gauge. If I'm operating with principles or not operating with principles, the result, the effect, the consequence is going to be peace or not peace. So that if I'm in a situation and I don't know if I'm doing like what I'm doing, if I'm doubting myself, if I'm having fear, if I'm having anxiety, if I feel guilt, if I feel shame, all those kinds of things are when I'm not affirming the power and the presence. That's when I'm not affirming for myself that I'm created in the image and likeness of God and I'm inherently good. That truth is true for me. That truth is true for you. That truth is true for everyone. That's the work of oneness. That's the languaging that we have to move towards and evolve towards. Part of our language is still caught up in the duality, right? If there's one power and one presence in the universe and it's everywhere present, then I've never been separated from it. It's always been present. There's no place I can go where the presence won't be. Although I have believed otherwise, right? We believe sometimes that, well, God's not in this situation. I can't ask God for help on this particular thing because I feel guilt, I feel shame. In the first service, we talked a bit about Dr. David Hawkins' work, Power versus Force, and made the point that the lowest form of energy that we can manifest and demonstrate is equivalent to shame. And where that came, that's sort of the result of the idea of original sin. You go back to the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And then the presence starts coming to the garden again. Hey, Adam, hey, Eve. God's back. And we've done what he told us not to do. And in that moment of their nakedness, they covered themselves with a fig leaf. That was an act of shame. And it was the shame that keeps us separated in our consciousness from the presence and the power of God working in our lives. It's us keeping it out. It's not God. God's always present. So but that's like one of the aspects of the oneness, the language of oneness, we're still trying to work out because we still have some things that imply the duality. It's just like those words, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Those are words that still imply duality a little bit. Just a little bit. But it's still there because we're projecting that trait onto another entity. Whenever God is just simply all power itself, omnipotence kind of idea. So the one power, the one presence, unity principle number 1 is going to help us heal the false belief in separation. And we have to let go of this idea that there's an opposing power. And when you do those two things, when you make those two adjustments in your consciousness as a result of unity principle number 1, it's a challenge. It's a challenge because the world seems to be going in the other direction. The world continues to affirm this dualism, doesn't it? Did y'all know that there's less than 1 million people, or right about 1 million people in unity churches in America? Only about 1 million. There's 330-something million of us. So that's less than 1/3 of 1% of the total population that follows unity. And unity is the leading New Thought church. All the other New Thought churches, Unitarianism and all those other kinds of things, they have fewer than unity does. Unity is the biggest movement among them. 1/3 of 1% of the population. That means 99 2/3% of the population don't care about unity, don't know about unity, don't agree with unity, think it's new agey. They're already committed to their traditional Protestant path or their Hebrew path or their Catholic path or any other path that they're on. The reason why I want to make this point is that we're one of the only ones working on a language of oneness. We're one of the only ones working on a language of oneness. It's not to say that we're better than, but it's to point out the responsibility that goes along with that. That if we're going to contribute to the evolution of consciousness and the evolution of the quality of life on the planet, then the biggest part of our spiritual growth, especially as it becomes more mature on the path, is the refining of our language. If you truly believe that you're not separate from God, then you have to language it that way. Because what does unity principle number 3 say? We are creating our experience, aren't we? By the thoughts and the feelings that we allow to dominate in our consciousness. And those things that are dominant in our consciousness are what we're going to act on. We're responsible for our experience. That responsibility freaks a lot of people out. That's what causes a lot of people to stay back this side of the line in their spiritual growth and everything, is the acceptance of personal responsibility. Because you can't blame it on somebody else then. If you're all powerful, if you have 12 powers that God gave you, and God's the active creative power in the world, and you're created in the image and likeness, and here's all your tools, here's all your creative faculties, go take the bandwidth and fill the content. We're responsible for that. So next time you think about the one power and the one presence, remember that if I believe this and I affirm this, and if you come to unity on a regular basis, you either believe it already or you're working on believing it, right? You're trying to work it out in your consciousness. But it becomes incumbent upon us to develop a language of oneness and be careful and be vigilant, because we can still slip into, I think I'm doing better this service, I think, but the first service I kept slipping into, calling God a him, he, and doing that kind of thing. It's like really subtle. You can slip in and out of it really quickly, that if I call God he, then I'm seeing him as a person. And it's very comfortable. That's the way I was grown up. That's the way I was raised. Most of us are aware of that consciousness going on out there. But there's a distinct difference. I'm not saying we're wrong or we're bad if we still refer to God as a he, or even as a she, or a living, loving spirit. All those things are fine. But be aware about whether or not that's just an example. There could be many, many other examples where unconsciously we're still continuing to affirm duality and dualism, when we're actually working on unity and oneness. Even Alan Watts, who was the sort of made Zen Buddhism popular in the 60s and everything with his books and everything, he still talks about it as, and I think the Hindu culture does too as well, non-duality. They don't call it oneness or unity, they call it non-duality. Well, to call it non-duality, you have to juxtapose that against the idea of duality. Well, Rick, if it's non-duality, what is duality? Well, now we're in a discussion about dualism, but after we explain that, don't worry about that, because it's not that, it's this other thing that's non-dual. No, it just needs to be oneness. It just needs to be unity, that we speak and affirm and cultivate our language in such a way that we're affirming that unity and oneness. You know what the opposite of racism is? Like a word. Does anybody have a word for the opposite of racism? If you look it up in the dictionary, there's probably 40 synonyms for racism, bigotry, and all kinds of other words that they'll do. But when you start looking for the opposite, there's almost no word in the dictionary for the opposite of racism, or sexism for that matter. But I'm going to offer to you all and to myself that word that's the opposite of racism or sexism is unity. Is unity, because racism does what? It foments division, doesn't it? It foments discord. It keeps us separated from one another. So since there's not that many words that are the opposite of that, I'm going to say to myself and to you all, let's start using unity, because that breaks down all of the segregation. It brings everybody into the one power and the one presence, which is where we are living anyway, right? We're living there anyway. But you're able to get the power out of that principle when you actually accept it and you begin to act on that in your life. The world needs a language of unity. The world needs a language of oneness. There's a lot of stuff in apparent disrepair that dysfunctional, right? There's a lot of dysfunction going on right now in our politics and our media and our culture, all over the place. It's hard to know what to do. And I can't go fix those things. You can't go fix those things. What you can do is cultivate a consciousness of oneness and unity. That's what's in your power to do. And then show up in the world that way. And so that's all I'm going to say about that today, right? Life is a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So right now I'm going to give y'all a song, and then we're going to lead ourselves into our offertory here in just a moment. Cheryl in her introduction mentioned the Strawberry Moon CD, so I'm going to play a song from that CD. This song is I would say if I had to characterize it, it's a song about faith and the search for purpose.